On August 10th, 955, on the plains near the Lech River close to present-day Augsburg in southern Germany, a comparatively small East Frankish army prepared to confront a significantly larger Magyar force. The outcome of this confrontation, known to history as the Battle of Lechfeld, would mark a turning point for Central Europe. For nearly 6 decades, Magyar raiding armies had terrorized the region, exploiting weaknesses in post-Carolingian political authority and repeatedly defeating Western forces in open battle. Lechfeld would not merely halt one campaign. It would demonstrate that the Magyar raiding system itself was no longer viable. Yet the central question remains, how did a numerically inferior army, led by a king whose own realm had only recently been torn apart by civil rebellion, managed to defeat an enemy that had dominated European battlefields for generations? To answer this, we must separate what contemporary sources explicitly tell us from what modern historians have reconstructed based on those accounts. Contemporary chroniclers, such as Lechfeld of Cremona, record that the Magyars entered the Carpathian Basin around 895 to 900. From this base, they launched repeated raids across Western, Central, and Southern Europe. Modern historians, drawing on Latin, German, and Byzantine sources, estimate that between 899 and 955, the Magyars conducted roughly 50 major campaigns into Europe. The Annals of Fulda describe raids into Bavaria and Italy as early as 900. In 907, at the Battle of Pressburg, a Bavarian army was annihilated, a defeat documented by multiple contemporary sources and widely regarded as one of the worst military disasters suffered by East Francia in the early medieval period. Archaeological evidence from destroyed settlements across Bavaria, Swabia, and northern Italy supports the scale and destructiveness of these incursions. The Magyars' military effectiveness rested on their tactical system. They fought primarily as highly mobile horse archers, equipped with composite recurve bows. Byzantine military treatises, especially the Tactica attributed to Emperor Leo VI, describe their methods in detail: rapid movement, feigned retreats, flexible formations, and sustained missile fire delivered from horseback. Western European armies dominated by heavy cavalry trained for close combat and shock charges repeatedly failed against this approach. Time and again, pursuit of apparently fleeing Magyar units led to encirclement and destruction. When the Magyars launched their 955 campaign, King Otto I of East Francia was not ruling from a position of unquestioned strength. Contemporary sources, particularly Widukind of Corvées, Res Gestae Saxonicae, describe how between 953 and 954, Otto faced a major internal rebellion. His own son, Liudolf of Swabia, joined forces with Conrad the Red, Duke of Lorraine and Otto's son-in-law, in what modern historians call the Liudolf Rebellion. The conflict stemmed from disputes over succession, authority, and royal patronage. Historian Timothy Reuter characterizes this period as a structural crisis in post-Carolingian kingship, reflecting deep tensions between hereditary rule and the need to maintain noble loyalty. By early 955, Otto had defeated the rebels, but at great cost. Conrad was stripped of his duchy, trust among the elites was badly damaged, and the kingdom's military resources were strained. Widukind explicitly notes the exhaustion of the realm's forces following the civil war. It is within this context that the Magyar campaign of 955 must be understood. Most modern historians interpret the Magyar advance of 955 as more than a typical raid. While contemporary sources do not use modern military terminology, the scale and coordination of the force suggest an unusually large expedition, likely intended to exploit East Francia's recent instability. Multiple sources, including the Vita Sancti Uadalrici by Gerhard of Augsburg, record that the Magyars besieged Augsburg in early August 955. Bishop Ulrich of Augsburg organized the city's defense, and the siege lasted several days. Although the city ultimately held, the situation was critical. Otto, who was in Saxony when news arrived, faced a strategic decision: abandon Bavaria to further devastation or march south with whatever forces he could assemble. He chose the latter. Contemporary chroniclers provide no reliable numerical totals for either army. Widukind describes the Magyar force only as vast or innumerable, while later medieval writers inflate these figures to implausible levels. Modern historians, based on comparative analysis of medieval logistics and known army sizes, generally estimate that the Magyar force numbered somewhere in the low tens of thousands. Estimates commonly range from around 10,000 to 25,000 mounted warriors, though no precise figure can be proven. Otto's army is better documented in relative terms. Widukind lists 8 units, often called legions, drawn from different regions: 3 Bavarian contingents, 2 Franconian contingents, 1 Swabian contingent, 1 Saxon Thuringian contingent, 1 Bohemian contingent under Duke Boleslav I. Based on what is known about 10th century levy systems, most modern scholars estimate Otto's total force at approximately 7,000 to 8,000 fighting men. This figure represents scholarly consensus rather than direct documentary evidence. Otto's march south is only partially documented, but the general outline is clear. As his army approached Augsburg, the Magyars executed a flanking maneuver through wooded terrain and attacked the German column from the rear. According to Widukind, the Bohemian contingent guarding the baggage train bore the brunt of the assault. The baggage train was overrun, and for a moment, the stability of the entire army was in danger. At this critical juncture, Conrad the Red, despite his recent rebellion, led a counterattack with Franconian cavalry. Widukind records that the attack drove the Magyar raiders off and stabilized the column, though Conrad himself was killed in the fighting, struck by an arrow after removing his helmet. Many modern historians suggest that this counterattack succeeded because the Magyar raiders had dismounted to loot the baggage train, temporarily sacrificing their greatest advantage: mobility. The main engagement took place on the Lechfeld plain, in an area constrained by the Lech River and adjacent wooded terrain. While the exact location remains debated, archaeological surveys and geographical analysis support the idea that the battlefield offered limited space for wide maneuver. Multiple contemporary sources allow several points to be established with confidence. Otto formed his army into a cohesive defensive formation. The Magyars attempted missile attacks and maneuver tactics. The German formation did not break. A counterattack followed. The Magyar force collapsed and fled. How this unfolded in detail must be reconstructed from limited evidence. Military historian John France and others argue that terrain played a critical role. The restricted battlefield limited the Magyars' ability to deploy their characteristic crescent-shaped formations and wide envelopment maneuvers. Unable to achieve decisive mobility, their tactical system lost much of its effectiveness. Widukind describes Otto's army holding firm under sustained arrow fire. Equipment evidence from the period suggests that many of Otto's cavalry wore mail armor and carried large shields, allowing the formation to absorb missile casualties without losing cohesion. Just as importantly, Otto's commanders resisted the feigned retreats that had previously lured Western armies into disaster. At a moment not precisely recorded in the sources, Otto ordered a general counterattack. With the Magyar forces compressed by terrain and unable to maneuver freely, the shock of heavily armored cavalry proved decisive. Widukind records that many Magyars were driven into the Lech River, where large numbers drowned during the rout. The aftermath of Lechfeld was as significant as the battle itself. Contemporary sources, including the annals of Augsburg and Liedprand of Cremona, describe a systematic pursuit of fleeing Magyar forces over several days. Towns and river crossings were garrisoned to prevent escape. Magyar leaders, including Bulcsú, who held the title of Hawker, and the chieftain Lel, were captured and executed at Regensburg. These actions appear to have been intended not merely as punishment, but as a deliberate effort to dismantle the Magyar raiding leadership. Large-scale Magyar incursions into Western Europe effectively ceased after 955, while smaller conflicts continued on the frontiers. The era of deep, devastating raids was over. The Battle of Lechfeld did not instantly transform the Magyars, but it marked a decisive shift. In the decades that followed, Magyar leaders increasingly pursued settlement, diplomacy, and integration rather than raiding. The historical record shows, by 973, Prince Géza of Hungary had established diplomatic relations with Otto's successors. In 1000, Géza's son Stephen was crowned King of Hungary with papal recognition. Hungary became a Christian kingdom integrated into European political and religious structures. This transformation was gradual, but Lechfeld demonstrated that the old raiding model was no longer sustainable. Lechfeld also transformed Otto's position within Europe. Widukind records that after the victory, Otto was acclaimed by his army as Imperator, a symbolic acknowledgement rather than a formal imperial title. 7 years later, in 962, Otto was crowned emperor in Rome by Pope John XII. That coronation depended on Italian politics and papal alliances, but Lechfeld provided the military prestige and ideological legitimacy that made imperial claims credible. Modern historians such as Karl Leiser argue that Lechfeld should be understood as a foundational moment for Ottonian imperial authority, not because it created the Holy Roman Empire outright, but because it established Otto as the preeminent defender of Christian Europe. The Battle of Lechfeld demonstrates that numerical superiority alone does not determine victory. Otto's success rested on several interlocking factors. Tactical discipline that resisted long fatal Magyar maneuvers. Unified command within an army drawn from formerly application of heavy cavalry at a decisive moment. Unified command within an army drawn from formerly divided regions beyond the battlefield. Lechfeld reshaped European history. It ended large-scale Magyar raids into Western Europe, strengthened political cohesion within East Francia, and laid the military and ideological groundwork for Ottonian imperial rule. On August 10, 955, beside the Lech River, the balance of power in medieval Europe shifted, not through legend or miracle, but through adaptation, discipline, and strategic understanding.